This first talk was pre-recorded by Doctors JJ and Desiree Hurtak. They are true Egyptologists. They have been to Egypt. Actually, JJ and Desiree went down levels underneath the I think it is the Giza Plateau, and there's levels underneath the Giza Plateau. The Giza Plateau is where the Sphinx, and then behind the Sphinx a little way is the Great Pyramid and these other pyramids. And but JJ in one of these tunnels went down levels, JJ and Desiree, and they discovered the tomb of Osiris there, which, you know, some people say Osiris was a real being. Some people say Osiris still exists and his contemplations are creating the world. So anyway, there was this ancient tomb there, which was a really original discovery about the age of the civilization and the knowledge that's encoded there. So that's some of the things I think they'll be talking about. But they also do sound archeology. They might talk about that. And they've really put a lot of time into being in Egypt and also encoding the higher spiritual teaching. So I think we'll get some of that spiritual teaching today. So Neil, JJ is also the author of the Keys of Enoch Book of Knowledge, which is a multi-dimensional course in understanding the incarnational self and the higher levels of existence. So their work includes all levels of being, from the physical, the sound and light. They also do a movie called the Light Show, the Light Journey of the Starseed. So they cover it all, and I think they have some very insightful points they're going to make in this video. So we'll talk about it after. So thanks, Neil and Raji.
All right, I'm going to play it now for you guys.
I'm Dr. J.J. Hurtak, social scientist, Egyptologist, and remote sensing specialist who's working in Egypt. This is my wife, Dr. Desiree Hurtak, and we're here to talk to you about Egypt, Schoolhouse of the Gods, as it was called in the Nag Hammadi text of Asclepius. This is an interesting story in the Coptic documents of antiquity of how Asclepius is given knowledge from a higher source, that Egypt was once the schoolhouse of the gods.
But he said, though, later on, it would become simply an area of tombs, meaning that that which was great at the ancient times would be ignored and not understood in present times. And that's exactly what Egypt is today.
Egypt, the land of the gods, would become the land of the corpses, quote unquote. The gods would return to the heavens. As a young scholar at the University of Chicago, I had the opportunity to travel to Egypt to study the Coptic documents and to get, shall we say, more acquainted with the ancient traditions, more of the metaphysical, theological, and cosmological is represented by this lost library of teaching uncovered between the years 1945 and 47. It was there that I became acquainted with the gargantuan statues and magnificent of the pyramids of Egypt that drew the scholars from Greece, from Rome, from all over the ancient world, such as Pythagoras, Homer, Herodotus, etc., etc. All of the great minds went to Egypt.
And we're going to be talking to you about really ancient Egypt, but also how we see it today with what we know. And the more and more we discover, and we've been some of those principal discoverers, the more we realize that it's far more vast. In fact, I often say there's more under the ground of Egypt than there is above the ground. And now scholars are talking about at least 100 pyramids, if not 200 pyramids, that can be found throughout all the land of Egypt. So, you know, when we look at the three pyramids, or we'll say the Great Pyramid is the wonder of the world, this is really a small part, but we do feel an integral part of what we're talking about and of the profound science, the profound mysticism that Egypt represents.
In 1973, I had a remarkable experience, a higher consciousness experience, where my mind was open and the morphogenic door is open far enough that I could see a little bit of the future as well as the past. I saw in a scenario, abstract, Mother Earth covered by a grid system of pyramids. I illustrated this with one of the great European artists. My book, known as The Keys of Enoch, has as his first cosmogrammetry picture a multicolored capstone of the Great Pyramid flying in space, connected with an ancient scripture of the people of God, representing really God's teaching going from Ethiopia to India. This is a very important picture regarding events that have recently come to pass with disclosures of so-called pyramidal objects or paraphysical objects seen over the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., as well as Red Square in Moscow. What are these floating objects all about? Is there a language of paraphysical symbols that the cosmic others are beginning to show us? And does this relate to the gods or the...
Well, although we will be focusing mainly on Egypt, you can't understand Egypt without seeing it as part of a major grid structure on the planet. And not only on this planet, but the Keys of Enoch also show the fact that there's pyramidal structures on Mars. So why are there pyramidal structures on Mars if no one had ever lived there? Well, we believe that there is a connection between the Earth and Mars, between even Cairo, El Kahira, and what is called the auspicious one connected with Mars.
Due to my early background in remote sensing with some of the more sensitive experts in Northern California, I saw and suggested to my NASA colleagues that there would be the evidence of pyramids in the Elysium Quadrangle on the Martian surface. And when the NASA probes brought back exciting pictures from the Mare 99 expedition, I received the privilege of publishing the first pictures of these unusual major and minor pyramidal sets in my book, The Keys of Enoch. Not only that, but I had the opportunity to work with individuals behind the scenes who did previous work in Egypt, such as Lamper Dolphin from Stanford Research Institute, who did the studies of the Great Pyramid and the Great Sphinx.
Right, there actually seems to be, specifically on the Sphinx, 2, perhaps 3 main openings. One is on the side of the Sphinx. The other is actually on the center back of the Sphinx. Literally, we'll say the middle part of the Sphinx back. But let's move forward to some of the current research that we've been doing. One of the main books that we recently wrote is called Giza's Industrial Complex. And as I mentioned, we feel that there's more even underground than there is above the ground because it's such a major structure. Now this ties into what maybe some of you have heard before about the profoundness of even the structure of the Great Pyramid and all the different chambers inside.
And we've had the opportunity to work with the great videographer Boris Said, Doctors Joe Jehoda and Joe Shore on expeditions with permission of the Egyptian authorities to actually use very sophisticated equipment to make the probes underneath the Giza Plateau represent the human reconstruction of the pyramids and the Sphinx as a clue to a vast cosmology of a living universe, with Orion on one side of the south chamber and the north chamber pointing to the circumpolar stars of Tuban, Alpha Draconis, and other circumpolar stars associated with the North Star.
So let's take a look at what we found in our work on the Giza Plateau. You see Dr. Hurtak standing here with a doorway behind him, right on one of the major causeways that goes down to the Sphinx. It's also, as you notice, in alignment with one of the sides of the Great Pyramid. So what did we find in or through that doorway? Well, first of all, we do remote sensing technology, which is different from remote viewing that many of you are familiar with. Remote sensing technology is usually ground penetrating radar. It can be airborne devices, it can be from airplanes or satellites, but in this case, many people who are doing archeological research do it on the ground because they're interested in seeing what is below the ground. And this is the work we were doing here on the Giza Plateau.
With Dr. Thomas DeBecky at the time of the Joshua expedition.
In connection with one of the Queen's pyramids. That they have Queen's pyramids that's around.
Smaller pyramids adjacent to the larger pyramid.
So we didn't find too much there, but we took that same equipment through the doorway and down 3 levels of what's now become known as the Osiris tomb.
A distance of some 30 to 33 meters down, approximately 100 to 105 feet, we had the opportunity to be the first with cameras underground 2 years before Zahi Hawass announces to the world in the year 1999 to actually film and to find the evidence of the tomb of Osiris. This is important because Osiris is considered in the Egyptian tradition as the Lord who brought music to Mother Earth. It was the use of musical harmonics plus ground-penetrating radar that allow us to understand the acoustical or should we say, acoustical physics profiles that were necessary in finding not only the tomb of Osiris, but also opening the pathway to adjacent tunnels.
So once again, you see Dr. Hurtak here with the same equipment that we had above ground, also now below ground. Actually, as much as 100 feet or about 33 meters below the ground. We're going to take a look at where he is and what he's seen. But what we found, we did even the walls of the tomb of Osiris just to see if there were some passageways. And there seemed to be some cavities, that's all you can see in ground penetrating radar, in the extending areas behind the walls themselves. So when we walked in through that doorway, you come to a very small little room. But then you go down extensive stairway, really 2/3 of the way down, so probably something like about 60 to 70 feet. And you come across this unusual room that has actually sarcophagi all around it. And then you go just another short distance down and you come to what is called the tomb of Osiris. And the reason why it's called that is because it is so deep. And we know Osiris was the god of the underworld. But in addition to that, you find these 4 pillars around a moat, literally, that contains a sarcophagus. One of the interesting reasons why we were able to see so much inside the tomb of Osiris is that it was a very dry period. Normally, water fills the tomb. Originally, it's all called a well shaft. But the time we went, we were able to find the water levels going down. So we could literally start to see that there was a tomb within the moat that surrounded the area. And we not only did ground penetrating radar, but we also had sonar because, as I mentioned, there was quite a bit of water and the sonar will see what's below the water. So it was an amazing time, and we believe it was key to not just finding the tomb, but to understanding more about Egypt. Because the tomb is one thing. I mean, you find tombs all over Egypt. Do you find people inside? Well, actually, there's never been a mummy found inside any of the 3 major pyramids on the Giza Plateau. There's a rumor that a mummy was taken from the small pyramid, but it was placed upon a boat that ultimately sank, so we'll never know if that was real or not.
Certainly there have been bones of workers that have been found in the descent, but not an official mummy as such. Even Mark Lerner admitted this. We were there to take actually a whole film of the moult, of the water levels. As you know, the whole mystery of ancient Egypt was the ability to have an underground hydraulic waterway system from the Red Sea into the Delta, as well as into the Giza area. And this water, we believe, was used in the system of hydraulics to provide for an energy source, as well as for fertilizing vast areas, making Egypt really the breadbasket of the ancient Near East. We're talking not simply about Giza proper, but all across central and northern Egypt. Here we see 2 of our colleagues, engineers, standing on one side of the moult, while Desiree and I on the other side with the photographic equipment.
Right, so the moat is actually technically behind them, and where the tomb itself is in front of them. Of course, everything had been filled with water at one point, and the water still exists in some of these locations. So everyone says, well, did you find Osiris's body? Well, no, technically, of course, Osiris was cut up into numerous parts, and the only reason that Horus actually exists is Isis came and mystically put these parts back together temporarily enough to be able to create Horus, to continue on the bloodline, so to speak, or we'll say the mystical line of ancient Egypt. So did we find a mummy? No, we didn't find a mummy there. So why is this important? Well, the mummy could have been robbed out of the tomb by robbers who had gone there earlier and been able to find what we found, and would have been maybe even 50 to 100 years or even 200 or 300 years before.
Or the tomb could also represent the openness of the human evolution, that which is found in the king's chamber, where you have in the sepulchre an open chamber representing, as it were, the initiation process.
Yes, and so we believe initiation in all of these areas is key and important. However, that's why we took the time also to compile a book with our associate James Brown called Giza's Industrial Complex, because we don't believe that all of this is only for mummies or tombs. If Asclepius is correct, and it was once the home of the gods, and we don't really know how we could even today build such elaborate structures, especially putting some high chambers up beyond where even our cranes practically today can go. We take a look at some other options in this book. So what we've come to the conclusion of is, in addition to the initiation process that was used by many, especially the pre-scientists, that there was also the possibility of making what we would call today hydrogen gas, or Brown's gas, even HHO, or any type of simple electric energy being generated. We're going to talk about that now in the next few slides to give you an understanding of what we mean.
So Desiree, how does our work with the industrial complex cipher why we use the word industrial?
Well, let's take a look at how we could interpret some aspects of the Great Pyramid. And we see that water, as I mentioned, water is throughout the lower places of the tomb of Osiris, and according to some of our colleagues, one of which has created a video called Cheops Lüge, which is...
It means the lie of Cheops, or Giza. This is a German documentary that we should look at more extensively, because the leading scientists in Germany all confirm the fact that water hydraulics were used.
Right, there seems to be some sort of interesting flow pattern, because the Nile was there. Of course, the Nile actually was much higher at an earlier point of time before the Aswan Dam was created. But nevertheless, it's still unique that water seems to flow up to certain positions. So we're proposing that water actually also went under the Great Pyramid, and then there was a type of siphon system that brought that water up, as you can see here, into the very beginning phases of the Grand Gallery. I know it's hard to understand, but if you look at hydrogen energy technology, which we report could be one of the most fantastic, renewable, clean energy sources for our time today, you find all you need is water and sunlight. That's all you need. And we'll say that places around the world are starting to understand this. Now, people talk about it's very costly to separate the H2O without having a lot of energy put in. But if you really do it right, a high school student could simply use solar system that generates this electrolysis to separate the H2O.
So the Great Pyramid is a great battery, making use of water and sun in a unique way.
Exactly. And so if you see here, basically if you had that gas separated, that hydrogen gas separated, and you create what's called cathodes and anodes on both sides of the ascending chamber, and guess what? There's actually holes on each side of the ascending chamber. One doesn't realize what they were for, why they were there. One could also say, hey, the Egyptians didn't have metals and things like that, but you say, no, they did. Even when Gottenbrink went all the way up the so-called air shafts, what did he find? He found a door with 2 little metal handles.
This is the use of the Upuat, or the sending robot device that he sent up. Unfortunately, Gottenbrink spoke too much, and the Egyptian authorities decided not to invite him back. Nonetheless, we have the opportunity as international scholars, as Egyptologists, to work with several expeditions and experts from different parts of Europe, who also confirmed the fact that there is a unique hydraulic system, as well as a transduction system in the air shafts themselves. And so we see here a side view of what is called the connecting point between the upper and the lower chambers.
Right, so if you had anodes and cathodes and you line them up along the sides of the ascending or grand gallery, you could actually be producing gas. Now, is this important for initiation? Absolutely, because many people nowadays are starting to realize that some of the forms of hydrogen gas or even ozone oxygen can be used for health purposes. It can also be used for agricultural purposes. So all this is really a very positive relationship. It can also be used for energy technology. You put gas into certain scenarios and you can actually create light bulbs that work. And this is something that
Von Daniken and his associates showed, as represented in the year 2000 in Vienna, Austria, at the Congress on Paranormal Archaeology.
Let's take a look at some of these other places. This is actually the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. They recently opened this, but they don't show you all of it. They show you some of the major center tombs, but look what else is there. They actually look like almost gas-producing power plants, and that's our argument today, is that some of this was used to create an energy that not just the Great Pyramid did, but other major pyramids around the Giza Plateau. And when you do that, what do you do to store the gas? Well, you need actually sarcophagi that are sealed, that are completely sealed, to allow the gas to be maintained. This is just one theory, and again, we don't neglect any of the other ideas of what it was, but we do believe that part of Giza was an industrial complex for producing certain types of renewable gas for health, for agriculture, and also for light and energy.
So our underground expedition, so to speak, would not only probe Giza proper, but also Saqqara, also Abu Sir, also in Luxor, where we found corresponding evidences that the Egyptians were able to, shall we say, use a type of chemistry to produce what we will call the fire serpent, as we see here in the tubes shown in Vienna, Austria in the year 2000, a type of neon burst of energy.
Right, this was an amazing museum. It had artifacts from all around the world for a particular period of time. And here's this one that could use certain types of gases to literally produce light. Very similar to what we see in the area of Dendera. And here you see Dr. Hurtak standing in front of the Dendera light bulb, but you also had just seen this unique artifact that was created to actually produce gas. It lights up like a light bulb.
So what are we talking about, Desiree? We're talking about Egypt as the schoolhouse of the gods, or we would call them now the super scientists of the ancient world. Not only do we have evidence of the Great Pyramid as modeling the evolutionary geometry of human evolution, but also, as we will talk about, the musical frequencies that go with the vibratory systems of each part of the human body.
And if you stay with us for our entire lecture, we'll be closing with a very powerful meditation, some of which was recorded in the Great Pyramid, and certainly all various other temples. However, I'd like to play for you right now some of the music we recorded in the sacred chambers of Egypt.
Four beams of light strike and open the interior chamber of the king, and we behold the Divine Mother as Virgin, Parthenos, as Alma, as angels, the earth.
And as we visualize ourselves within the ancient tombs, we discover that we are no longer within the tomb of death, but the temple of light, the temple of resurrection. And we are energized to return back into the stars, connected with the stellar fields of Orion. And the pyramid is the model for our ascension. Let us vibrate inside the tombs with our higher mind, our open heart, and the greater vibrations of life.
Realizing that our body is a tabernacle of the Spirit. Recognizing what is missing in Egyptology, which is the music of the pyramid itself. The acoustical physics of aligning every chakra, every part of our body with the greater body of knowledge. We would call it the higher self, the over-self. As we do, we enter into the man-God, woman-God partnership, which I believe was the whole purpose of cosmic civilization. So as you go up and down the Nile, it's like the spinal system of the human body. For example, another area we worked in the region called Fayum or Harara, the Pyramid of Harar, was what we will call saltwater batteries that were uniquely constructed and placed underground thousands of years ago.
Well, the theory is that there is a labyrinth in front of the Hawara Pyramid. And what's interesting, once again, if you go into the Hawara Pyramid, what do you find on the ground floor? Right there, you find water. So why would you build pyramids in the desert on top of water? Now, yes, it can be used for initiation, but as we've pointed out, it can also be used for energy.
And we had the opportunity to look at this also with researchers from the University of California and Stanford University, who agreed with us that these templates they were so uniquely composed by computer chips, could represent an underground saltwater battery system with 3,000 cells that would amplify in parallel phase the energy output. This would explain how there was the ability to use energy above ground, underground, as well as through battery storage.
So even Herodotus tells us that there was a multi-leveled labyrinth. But it wasn't just one room or even 100 or 300 rooms. There were 3,000 rooms in this labyrinth. Of course, it was multi-terraced. But the idea is that they were not normal rooms that you would go and sleep in. They were actually electronic cells. Because what's nearby? Hawara, but the unique saltwater lake of Egypt.
Which was made on purpose.
We believe that saltwater battery energy was able to be used with fresh water, where the two came together, and you could create an energy technology.
This is very interesting because in our book, Giza's Industrial Complex, I have pictures from Russian scholars who are also Egyptologists of gigantic pyramids that were built that were above the waterline as well as below in ancient times, that were drawing energy, we believe, from the combination of salt water and fresh water.
So in the lake, that's what this picture is all about. In the lake,
Lake Morris.
In the lake, there were two pyramids, supposedly by ancient scholars who talked and reported on it. Two large pyramids with as much going into the water as outside the water. So it wasn't just to crawl underground. Why would you put a lower section of the pyramid underwater unless it had some energy or technology function?
And how could you get these gigantic lights on the top of the pyramids themselves?
And why are all the major pyramids of Egypt located so near the Nile River? And in addition to that, if we go down to the area of Luxor and Karnak, we find some very, very interesting, we'll say, healing baths that were used. And we argue in our book, the water in those baths were hydrogen water, what we would call HHO or Brown's gas, something that was literally energized or electrolyzed. It wasn't just normal water, it was energy water. Where did all this technology come from?
Well, if we look at the pyramid text on the walls there in Giza, or we look at the ancient documents that were brought together by a variety of scholars, the British, the German, the Russian, we will see that this higher teaching came from, should we say, superluminaries known as Horus. In this next exhibit, we see Horus with a multicolored symbolism of flowers or sacred geometries from a sun-like system of energy going to the face of an initiate who has her hands raised in a teaching position of receiving knowledge.
The technology actually that we found both in the Great Pyramid location of the Giza Plateau, as well as in Saqqara, as well as many of the other locations, is really far beyond what primitive man would have made, we'll say, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago.
And so this is really a simplified periodic chart of showing how the elements of life were conveyed from the higher evolutionary source known as Horus, Heru Kenu, or we would call the universal mind, to the human subject, that were then collected, namely the documentation and personified in the various rooms above and below the ground all along the Nile River.
So maybe that's why in the temples of Seti connected with Abydos, you find the unusual high ceiling glyph. That looks actually quite brand new, but it's of course not. That shows a type of helicopter, a type of submarine, a type of spaceship. Let's take a closer look at it. You can see it there. So who did this? What were they looking at? Why did they even know about anything that really looks so close to a spaceship?
Again, this is an upper lintel. This is something that could not be simply counterfeited by some type of European student or some type of prankster from one of the Near Eastern countries. No, this is in the actual lintel itself of the Great Temple.
And this whole area, the Abydos and the Osirium, is one of the oldest structures of ancient Egypt. So this is something really, the ancients really had some level of contact with other levels of intelligence. We would say both extraterrestrial, but we would prefer to also acknowledge the power of the ultra-terrestrial intelligence.
Now this book, The Keys of Enoch, which came out of my experience of contact with one called Enoch, goes into great detail and names the 3 stars in the belt of Orion, connected with the south shaft of the Great Pyramid. In other words, it is the first published book that goes into the details of what is called Mentaka, Anotak, and Analam, mentioned by name the 3 Arabic names for the 3 central stars in the belt of Orion that also represent the 3 major pyramids at Giza.
But what's really interesting is the fact that only recently have we discovered that we are in the spiral arm of the Milky Way associated with the Orion arm or the Orion spur. And so it makes Orion actually fairly close to us, but also an amazing star constellation. In fact, what's interesting about that is Dr. Hurtak in his experience with Enoch, where Enoch physically took him through a pillar of light, which is a spiritual awakening, a Merkaba experience, but also the physical body was actually gone as well, but not to another world, but he went actually through the area of Orion into other dimensional realms. So Dr. Hurtak came back and said immediately, Orion is the cosmic gateway. It's the threshold gate. And that's why key pyramids are aligned with Orion. And the Pleiades is connected with our civilization.
So the Great Pyramid is a type of chronomonitor that prepares us for physical and non-physical ascension or connectiveness. I'm speaking paraphysically of the other worlds. More specifically, with programmers or the great architects that came from what we call the realm of Orion, specifically to this local star system, this solar system, this planetary system, where the 3 pyramids were, shall we say, inspired into the minds of the great builders of ancient Egypt in the Golden Age to create that which would exist in the sands of time to the end of the planetary change. We believe we're at the time of the planetary change. This is why the cover of the Keys of Enoch have the coming or the return of the dove, the symbol of universal communication, with the pyramidal symbol at the top of the head of the dove, also representing 7 emanations or shafts of light coming from the higher world to the human world, being captured by the human hands. 7 pairs of hands represent the 7 seals of the 7 chakras, all of which must come together to understand the full story of evolution, of why each, shall we say, level of knowledge has the need of this pyramidal matrix.
And although Orion is looked at in the Lakota culture and many other cultures of the world, I always turn for a moment to the work of Linda Shelley in the Mayan culture. And she saw that Orion was connected with the central God figure. In fact, she claims that the 3 stones that were ritualistically placed in the hearth of the ancient Mayans was a symbol, and that those were the home of the gods and the home of the Father, who they recognized was in Orion.
So we see here the Mayan schematic representing Orion, as you see on the left side of the screen, the ecliptic, as well as the 7 Macau. Could you give us just a brief overview, Desiree, of what this represents also in the Mayan history?
Well, like the Great Pyramid, where you have, we'll say, Orion on one side, the South Star shaft from the King's Chamber. If you look at the Great Pyramid, on the North Star shaft coming out from the King's Chamber, you also find them pointing to the area of Tubin and the polar region. This is connected with the Little Bear and the Large Bear, Ursa Minor and Ursa Major. So why do you have this dichotomy? Well, you can see it right here, according to Linda Shelley, that the same dichotomy existed in the Mayans. They saw the duality. that we're living in, where you have Orion and the Pleiades on one side, and you have the Big Dipper on the other with Tubin, the polar star. We're kind of locked into this polar cycle for a while until we move forward through the ecliptic of the serpent power into that of Orion and the Pleiades.
So from two different parts of the world, two different time zones, you have the same mathematical symbols.
What do you find? Well, interesting enough, we find that Chichen Itza was also built on top of water. Again, yes, it could be used for initiation, but we believe it was twofold. It's called a dual use technology, where you use it for the initiation of the water and the cleansing, but you also use it for energy technology. Otherwise, why would you ever build a pyramid this large on top of water?
And why would you have, it's where the shadow representation of the serpent-like energies coming down. You have, again, the coordination of the same understanding of the circular movement of Mother Earth in relationship to a higher body of knowledge. We believe this is very important because Desiree and I have pioneered this with the Academy for Future Science, showing the culture history, the linguistics, the music, acoustical, the mathematical, the paraphysical, as well as the cosmological significance of why the Great Pyramid is a capstone or chronomonitor of all basic levels of knowledge the human race has to understand. And our colleague, Robert Schock, in his book called Voyages of the Pyramid Builders, is suggesting what we said many years ago, that there was a navigational culture that built many of these pyramids through the inspiration of what was there in Egypt. In other words, Egypt was the central matrix for extending expeditions through the Phoenician sailors in a variety of directions. We're now finding in other cultures in other parts of the world on a smaller scale the replication of what we will call the basic building blocks of evolution. We are a biological pyramid in our vibratory nature, in need of a higher mind that is missing the capstone. We are a human biophysical pyramid, waking up to a vast and awesome universe in need of opening our mind's eye to the greater geometry, which is the type of triangular headdress the ancients put on, which represents the greater cosmology of life, which represents the cosmic intelligence that periodically initiates and refurbishes the evolutionary cycle of the human race. We see here in the next exhibit the work that we did as we began to do musical testing inside the sepulchre, which is that large coffin-like granite chamber inside the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid itself. We found that the heartbeat, the human heartbeat, was represented in the acoustical structure of the music pulses, 68 to 72 beats per minute. We find that this is of interest because we are in the reddish portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the red granite sepulchre represents, as it were, the human body prostrate, as it were, laid out in stone, representing the higher symbol of initiation. We are freeing ourselves now from a three-dimensional location of life as we proceed to open our mind into a fifth-dimensional sound resonance process.
Right, so in a certain sense, the Great Pyramid or the King's Chamber becomes a type of vortex energy. And when I was sitting there meditating one evening in the Great Pyramid, actually I saw the walls drop away, and what you saw was nothing but the outside night sky. What's fascinating to me is I had reported on this to several of my friends, and my husband, of course, and 2 years later, my other friend from Switzerland was actually in the chamber, also doing chanting. He had the same phenomena.
As well as a famous filmmaker from Germany who had been there years before who had the same experience. So is there a paraphysical vibratory circuitry that connects the physical with the non-physical? And the answer is yes. And this we find in the acoustical physics that we have exemplified in our work and also in our music.
First of all, who built the pyramids? We do feel they're cosmic beings, not extraterrestrial beings, but many of the glyphs do show their elongated skulls. And that's very interesting, as you see here. So they look like us, they seem like us. but were they also teachers for us to help us grow into who we are today?
That's the question. And we see this also in the entourage of various teachers embodied in statuary in the corridors, in the sacred grottos and the sacred sanctuaries above and underground.
So now we're going to be starting our meditation, and this is, as you see here, from sound vibrations that we've recorded. We actually recorded both white noise and pink noise in both the Pyramid of Chichen Itza as well as the Great Pyramid. We are comparing, as we speak, the sound frequencies, but most of them seem to be able to activate certain chakra centers of the body.
Here we see ourselves with the great singer Paul Thomas Burns from Mexico, who was with us in Chichen Itza, as well as the Giza. As some of you know, I'm also a composer, musicologist, who at one time in the 1970s was on the music faculty and also on the Faculty of Critical Studies at California Institute of the Arts with Ravi Shankar, Leonard Bernstein, Andre Previn, and other notables. I had the opportunity to do also musical testing with colleagues of mine from NASA, also who worked in the Star Trek series, both in Mexico and in Egypt. On this location that we see here in the picture, my colleague Paul Thomas Burns, a very well-known singer, with the musical test before us in amplifying the sounds inside the chamber, which we're now going to hear. At a different time, in the same location, I had the opportunity as a tenor to intone the ancient Hebrew Aramaic chants. And we see what happened as a result. This picture was taken when I was singing of golden light pouring down the Grand Gallery of Egypt. Golden light pouring down in the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, like a standing columnar wave that was moving up and down the staircase. This was very overwhelming, to say the least, and the Egyptian guards were rather troubled and uncertain as to what caused this musical manifestation or explosion of color. And I explained that there was a paraphysical musicology built into the pyramids that not only represented the different chakras or centers of the human body, but also under certain conditions, when the sound structures were properly placed, this pyramid itself would become like a musical orchestra. A symphonic synergy would take place, and great shafts of light would be seen, as they were in ancient time, recorded in the Bible when the pillars of light appeared from the sky and the children of Israel made their way out of Egypt into the Holy Land. That, to me, is a symbolic description of actual events that could take place and did take place, not only in Egypt, but also, as we see from work shown by my other colleague in Mexico, known as Jaime Maussan, of a pillar of light that appeared over the pyramid of Chichen Itza some years ago. So we have really a verification of the fingerprints of the Elohim, the return of the cosmic intelligence, specifically over these great learning centers. The tourists would call them simple pyramids. We would call them the places for fire in the middle. The Greek word pyramid, meaning fire in the middle, places of awakening knowledge within our body, mind, and spirit, that we are here in the schoolhouse of the gods, or the Elohim, to prepare for the greater life that is connected with the stars of the imperishable Elohim, or the Imsak, the gods as they are called in the Egyptian language.
So let us hear now from our music that we recorded in these chambers. It's called The Opening of the Great Pyramid and the Names of the Divine Mother. You can hear the resonant vibrations. And I believe the sound frequencies also go into lower and lower undertones. We're not just looking at overtones, we're also looking at undertones. And these vibrations come out to put your mind into states of calm, states of awareness, states of understanding.
Let us take time now to quietly listen to these sounds.
As we intone the sacred Coptic text of the great truths of the Eternal Father, the Eternal Spirit, and the Eternal Son, the the triple power within us, as light bodies awaken to reclaim our destiny, taken through the tomb of space and time, and no longer subject to the archons, or the potentates, or the pharaohs of this world, liberated in the image of Ecce Homo, the higher man, the higher ascent, and the higher resurrection.
Etepek monogenes shiri shois. Open open soterizor. Ein Christos ekitis evolocem ten shoisine. Terenti Theodicos et oati age Maria apistem. O einem timet ad mogin. Nemo meracton, nemo meracton, nemo men acquiti. Ela vera homologon en Dios homologia in aenis, naren Pontius Pilatus, aptis eleriego, igen piscete to aventi, estapros gen pevoscemen, imo felerigon terem, alitos tenati, gempitiv mitnoti, forgetiv metrominos osominot. Jose oricim voleftim zigon, en nosotinem moco evol, en tinem onemok, en nachivo, tinati, jecete met me. Amen. Amen.
Feel the light. Feel the love. Feel yourself being in Egypt in ancient times.
Understand why Moses was there, why Jacob was there, why the Christ child was there to bear witness to something even far greater than the Egyptian gods, the supreme being that was able to allow this type of knowledge to be there for the ancient world.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. And amen.
And so as we close now, we want to thank you for joining us.
And we also want to emphasize the female side that's been left out of so much of intellectual history. It is the female side of the inner nature that is coming alive as we go into the 21st century. It is the female voice, the mother nature of spirit within the human form, and also the recognition that we find in the very words in the ancient genealogy of how certain names go with their female and male counterparts to bring both together. The male and the female must cooperate. The left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, the scientific and the spiritual, must converge in marriage. And this is so important. And so we ask that the teachings of Egypt be seen as one of the sacred places of initiation, one of the places where we are being shown once again after thousands of years that we are being prepared to join the cosmic university, and we are being prepared to understand the mysteries of the heavens that even the book of Job in the Old Testament speaks of when it speaks of Orion and the Pleiades. We are going home into the universe through the greater initiation.
And let us behold the beings that appear in these sacred areas, the orbs of light,
the pillars of light, the pathways of light, and you receiving the light from the higher, most high God, El Elyon. May we be blessed.
If you're interested in our work, please go to keysofenoch.org. You'll find our books, our music, our videos, and many other interesting information points for your own experience
And as you can see behind me, this great picture from the Canadian artist Eric Bolin, the structures of going into the heavens and building cities in space through sacred geometry is what we believe the ancient Egyptians were showing us, the basic building blocks, the architecture of the mind, the sacred architecture of spirit, the music of the heart, and the compassion of life must all come together properly if we are to be the living capstone, if we are to set the captives free. If we are to understand the keys of Enoch, we must be the loving servants of all creation.
So make this time now for your own personal initiation. We thank you for joining us.
This is JJ, Dr. Hurtak, and Dr. Desiree Hurtak, wishing you blessings of light, ad astra, to the stars and to eternity.
And keep looking up. We thank you.
Excellent. Wasn't that?
That was
Wow,
incredible.
wow.
Have you ever seen them before, Raji? Have you seen their work?
Yes.
Oh.
I met them in Toronto. They were at the this huge conference that was happening there. My mind is blown. Like, look at like pages and pages of notes.
Oh.
Like,
What's so amazing about their work is that their cosmology is so big. They go from the science, the archaeology, the mechanics of ancient Egypt, and they go into the spiritual knowledge. So it's wide and it's deep. This is the work they've devoted the last since '73 when JJ had that opening. He actually went with his body to these other realms and downloaded that book. It wasn't channeled. He always liked to say it wasn't channeled. It was downloaded to him from that experience in those other dimensions about Egypt, about the great cosmology, about the interdimensional doorways that we're a part of. So they're going to join us at the end of the day for a discussion. So
great. That's
notes on
exciting.
They hit on so many levels. I mean, like, whoa, it was just so multifaceted and a perfect way to start the day, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Big
Right.
time.